This episode is sponsored by Innova Culinary. They take professional kitchen tools and make them affordable and easy to use. In particular, I love the Innova Precision Oven for all of its features. The Innova Precision Oven combines controlled steam injection with convection cooking and probe-based temperature monitoring, so you can get the precise temperature control of sous vide plus the browning of a convection oven in one easy-to-use appliance. It also makes for some incredible bread, as you'll see in today's episode on Challah. Let's get down to basics. Alright, so challah is a pretty easy enriched bread dough. We're going to start by combining the dry ingredients: 500 grams of bread flour, 7 grams or 2 1/4 teaspoons of instant yeast, and 5 grams of kosher salt, tiny whisked until homogeneous. Then, in a separate bowl, the wet stuff: 2 large eggs plus 1 large egg yolk, given that this is a very rich and eggy bread, and it's also a pretty sweet bread coming from 80 grams of honey, and it is also rather a fatty bread, so we gotta add some fat. 60 grams of neutral flavored oil like vegetable or canola. We're likewise tiny whisking the wet ingredients until homogeneous and then dumping them on top of the dry. And now, using a paddle or dough hook, we're gonna bring everybody together, and at first you're gonna notice that this is a really dry and crumbly mix, and that's when you're gonna realize that you forgot to add the water. 125 grams of room temperature water, better late than never. Now, challah requires high gluten development, so it is ideal to knead it in a stand mixer, but it can be kneaded by hand, and just to prove it, I'm gonna do half this batch by hand. Because I remember what life was like before I had a stand mixer. It's not as fun, it's not as easy, but it is doable. Kind of like going through life without socks. So we're kneading for about 6 minutes in the stand mixer, or depending upon your forearm strength, genetics, and sheer force of will, about 10 to 15 minutes by hand. Either way, we want it to pass the window pane test. When you grab a little hunk of dough, you want to be able to stretch it out as thin as the laws of physics allow, so that light can freely travel through it, like a little doughy window. You'll also find that it's pliable, less sticky, and can be stretched into a taut, smooth ball. So while the stand mixer dough is ready to proof in an oiled covered bowl for about 45 minutes at room temperature, or until it's puffed up by about 50% depending on how warm your kitchen is, the hand kneaded ball still has a ways to go. No matter how you knead it, these guys are proofing in oiled covered bowls for about 45 minutes at room temperature, or until they've puffed up just a little by about 50%. Now onto the more challenging bit, something I've never attempted before: the braid. I'm using a scale and maths to accurately divide my dough into 6 equal pieces, each of which I'm going to keep under cover of plastic wrap to prevent them from drying out while I work with each piece. Once everybody's divided, we're going to grab a piece of dough and pat it out into a rectangle, just a few inches wide and tall, that we're then going to tightly roll into a log, very similar to the way that we shape a baguette or most bread loaves. Once sealed shut, we're going to start rolling it out into a sort of torpedo about 14 inches wide, trying to keep it thick in the center and tapered at the tips. You can make your logs fatter in the center if you want a more dramatically shaped loaf. However you roll it out, you want to keep relative uniformity between all the logs. Rinse and repeat with the remaining 5 pieces, keep everybody under plastic wrap, and now it's time to start braiding. We're going to start by arranging these dough logs into a sort of doughy sunrise pattern, sort of fanned out in front of you with all the ends on one side touching, and 3 on each side from center. Now, using the heel of your hand, we're going to press all the dough together and begin the braiding process, which I'm sure somebody else can explain more eloquently, but here's my shot. We're going to start by taking the 2 strands on the outside of the fan and crossing them over each other so that they're facing the opposite direction. I'm going to call these the base strands. Then, with Kendall's guidance, we're going to lay the first strand down the center of the 4 remaining strands. Then, on the opposite side, the second strand from the bottom is crossing over the braid to become the new base strand. Now we're back to our 2 base strands and 4 other strands fanned out above them. Now the other base strand, the opposite of the one we used last time, is crossing over into the center. The second strand from the bottom crosses over to become the new base strand, and we basically repeat this process until no dough remains. If any of that made even a modicum of sense, I consider this a major accomplishment. We're pinching off all the tiny strands and tucking the pinched end underneath the bottom of the loaf. There's a pinched loaf joke in there somewhere. And there you have it, a braided loaf, which we're going to place on a parchment-lined baking sheet and administer the first of 2 thorough brushings with a beaten egg. Challah has a deep, golden, yellowy, eggy exterior, so make sure you get every last nook and cranny. Then we're covering loosely with some oiled plastic wrap and letting proof at room temperature until doubled in size. This is where the Innova Precision Oven can come in handy, because you see it has a proofing setting, where it perfectly recreates a balmy afternoon in Florida in October, about 82 degrees, 60% humidity, the perfect conditions in which to proof your bread. You can obviously still do this in your kitchen, but it may take more time depending on how cold your kitchen is. Once doubled in size, we're administering our second thorough egg washing of the day. Once every crevice has been been egged, it's time to plop this guy into a preheated 375°F oven, preferably with convection, for 18 to 20 minutes, rotating halfway through baking until it's browned and burnished and registers about 200 to 210°F at its thickest point. Then this guy's headed onto a rack to cool completely about 4 hours, or to cool slightly, if you want to sink your teeth into some fresh, warm, fluffy challah. Now, arguably one of challah's greatest uses is in French toast, for which we're going to need a bigger loaf. Last batch of dough I used to make 2 smaller loaves, so now I'm going to make 1 big loaf out of 1 batch of the dough, which, because of its greater mass, is probably going to take a little bit longer to proof and calls for a slightly longer, cooler bake time, 350°F for 25 to 30 minutes, which should yield a loaf appropriate for French toast sized slices. Once this guy's cooled completely, because I forgot to film it with the other loaf, we're going to take a look at that crumb. It should be very soft but have a firm structure with a couple irregular bubbles, but no big air pockets or gaps. Now, while this obviously makes for good eating, especially with some soft salted butter, to accelerate this guy into French toast, we need to slice him up, big, thick, hearty slices that we're going to arrange on a rack set in a rimmed baking sheet and either leave out overnight to stale or dry out in a low temperature oven, 200°F for about 2 hours. We want to get rid of as much moisture as possible to make more room for sweet, eggy custard to be soaked up. My favorite formula is 3/4 cup each heavy cream and whole milk, 4 large egg yolks for an extra bit of richness, 3 tablespoons of dark brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract or 2 teaspoons of vanilla paste, about 1/4 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg, always opt for freshly grated, the zest of 1 small lemon, then all the apple pie or pumpkin spice greatest hits, half teaspoon cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon ground cardamom, 1/4 teaspoon ground ginger, and 1/8 teaspoon ground cloves. Go ahead and tiny whisk that until it's homogeneous, add a big pinch of kosher salt, and plop in or pour over your dried out slices of challah, which, depending on how dry they are, can now soak overnight so you got French toast ready to go in the morning. Now, this talk of apple pie spice gave me an idea. Why don't we make some apple pie stuffed French toast? We're starting by peeling and thinly slicing 2 large Granny Smith apples. Bring them on over to the stovetop where we're going to saute them in 2 tablespoons of butter along with 1/4 cup of brown sugar and a little pinch of cinnamon, sauteing for 5-10 minutes until they're nice and brown, soft, and have made their own sauce. Don't forget to season with a little bit of kosher salt, and if you have any of that apple cider concentrate left over from making apple cider donuts, now's a great time to use it. Totally optional, but it helps make the apples taste like they went to apple school to learn just how great of an apple they could be. Next up, instead of the traditional maple syrup, we're going to make ourselves a creme anglaise to sort of emulate the ice cream aspect of apple pie. Into a big old heat-proof bowl goes 2 large egg yolks, 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon vanilla extract or 1 tablespoon of vanilla paste, and optionally all those apple pie spices we put in the French toast custard. Go ahead and whisk that together until it's nice and smooth, and then over on the stovetop in a small saucepan, we're combining 1/3 cup each heavy cream and a whole milk, heating over medium-low flame until it's just starting to simmer, taking it off the heat and slowly streaming it into the egg and sugar mixture while whisking constantly to slowly temper the eggs and make sure that they don't scramble. Once everybody's combined, we're going to add the mixture back to the pot, clean up the horrible mess we've made, head back on over the stovetop and place this over low heat, whisking constantly until it reaches about 185°F, or it has reached the state of nappe, where it richly and glossily coats the back of a spoon and leaves a clean trail when wiped with a finger, and has the texture and flavor of melted ice cream because that's what it effectively is. It's pre-ice cream. Cover tightly and refrigerate or serve at room temperature because now it's time to fry our French toast, which we're going to do on a cast iron griddle with a whole bunch of butter until it's nice and lightly browned on both sides. Then, when it's served, we're going to make a sort of French toast sandwich with our apples in the middle, top it up with another slice, the requisite pat o' butter. Then don't forget to strain your creme anglaise through a fine mesh sieve before serving to catch any errant bits of accidentally coagulated egg. Drizzle over top and serve. Now, while this recipe is not the most traditional French toast in the world, there's no denying that challah gives brioche a run for its money as best French toast base. It's rich, it's got a great texture, it's very pretty, and it's very easy to make, especially with the help of today's sponsor, to wit. Thanks again to Innova Culinary for sponsoring today's episode. I use the oven's steam injection and convection fan to help create the perfect loaf of challah. It works just like a professional bread oven that uses steam to start the baking process and encourage a perfect rise, along with dry heat to finish and develop a crust. The oven has a ton of other innovations. The wet and dry bulb thermometers measure not only the air temperature of the oven, but also the surface temperature of the food, ensuring you don't overcook anything and get perfect results every time. And cooking in sous vide mode gives you the edge-to-edge doneness you get with traditional sous vide, but without a bag. The Innova Precision Oven also has an app with recipes, including this one, that can program the cooking times for you. For more info and to get one for yourself, head to the link in the video description.